Welcome to Inside Human Capital, presented by Connex Partners and Sabretooth.
Hi, and welcome to the CSuite Edge, Inside Human Capital. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the CEO and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting, and I've partnered for this series with Connex Partners. Connex is this amazing human capital invite-only ecosystem, and it has allowed me to connect with some of the best and brightest folks in that space across North America. In fact, I've got one of them with me today, Joseph Fiorino, who is a Senior Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations at First Student, which frankly, not a company I knew about, but you guys are the largest student transportation business in North America, both the U.S. and Canada, over 55,000 employees. Joseph, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I know that you've got, I want to say 8,000 or 9,000 folks there in Canada that fall under your bailiwick, which is amazing. You know, you consider how big this place is. As we were talking pre-show, you're talking about, well, if it's a yellow school bus, it's probably got our label on it somewhere, right? And you have to work across states and jurisdictions that are right to work or unionized. I mean, I just, it's mind boggling to me. So I'm hoping that you could share with us, you know, for a minute or so, kind of what got you to where you are there at First Student and what it's like, what you guys are working on, and then we can push off into the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer by background. And so after I finished my articling, got accredited by the Law Society, went to work in the government sector, kind of on the political side, doing, helping a lot on policy and teacher negotiations. I'm someone that likes to see change and improvement. I've got a buddy who I say, he's a great chef. I always say he could open up a Michelin star restaurant, and, you watch him and he takes all these ingredients and he makes a dish out of it. What I always wanted in like the corporate world was do the same thing, but on the corporate side, where, you're making policies, you're making organizational change, you're making strategic decisions where you're taking all these pieces, you're putting them together, and then you're coming with a product that is great from a corporation standpoint. And so, spent the years in government, really fun time, learned a lot. And then I wanted a role that was kind of more independent. Someone, like most employees, don't like being micromanaged. So I wanted something where I kind of could just do my own thing, obviously get the strategic goal and direction from leadership, but then it was my decision on, okay, how am I going to implement this? How am I going to make sure I'm getting us from point A to point B where the company wants to go? So I came into First Student. It was an easy-ish transition, right? School bus sector is still in the education sector. So, had some familiarity with them, started on the labor council side, working with unions, doing collective bargaining, arbitrations, human rights claims, so on and so forth. And then I transitioned into the HR role, and then I've just moved up over the years. So I've been with the company now coming up to 5 years. So now I oversee all of the HR generalists, the labor councils, the TAO team, and the benefits team. So I've got a total department of around 40 individuals. And, I love that because you're overseeing a country, which means I can do that like ingredients to meal from an HR perspective. And love the team, love working with the field, the sectors. Really interesting, really unique. And when I've hired people on my team, one thing I always say is like, you're not going to be bored working in the student transportation sector. There's always something new going on and a lot of challenges to solve.
It almost, I know you say you're not going to be bored. I know it's dealing with those challenges. At the same time, I'm like, student transportation. I mean, sure cure for
I thought
insomnia,
it was going to be easy.
Well, I'd say it wasn't going to be hard, just it's like, it's not one of your, okay, we're not flying people, or we're not building skyscrapers, or we're not coming up with new battery technology. But at the end of the day, if you guys don't do your job right, there's a major problem, right? There's very few things more precious to us than children and that sort of thing. So I think it's interesting because you guys are in two different countries, and we've had a lot of things going on trade-wise, politically, and so on and so forth. And you have this split arrangement. It's fascinating to me. And plus working across jurisdictions with, unions in Canada are going to be a little bit different, but similar to unions in the US. But I don't know that Canada has right to work like we have in a lot of US states, like where I am. It's a different animal all around. And I think one of the things that's fascinating to me and that I'm eager to ask and get your thoughts on relates to employee engagement. We spend so much time from a corporate perspective thinking about what is an employee engagement? Are we getting it? How important is it? How do we measure it and encourage it in a way that benefits not just the employee, but also benefits the organization at large and help us achieve our goals. And so I'm hoping, because I know it's a particular area of interest for you too, that you could dive a little bit deeper with us on that topic, define it, help us understand how to go about managing or measuring, managing, and encouraging it.
Yeah, and employee engagement at first is it's a high priority for us. Obviously, number one is safety, because like you said, our main focus is we got to make sure kids are getting to and from school safely. And a way we can do that is through employee engagement, right? I'm someone who, I think there's few buckets of people, right? Hopefully a lot of us have gone and had jobs that we thoroughly enjoyed, where, we like getting up in the morning, doing the work, working with our colleagues. And I'm sure a lot of us have gone through and had jobs you hated. I've gone through that. I've had bad leaders, bad coworkers, just work that wasn't fulfilling. And, we focus a lot on making sure that, our employees want to work for us, because as everyone, it's been shown through multiple studies is, you get better attrition rates, you get better performance, and you get safer employees as well, which for us is crucial. So, and I think also what's important on the employee engagement side, I think right now, HR is going through this identity crisis on what's its role, right? We're seeing a lot on LinkedIn news articles, right? I think a couple of weeks ago there was that big company that like fired its whole HR department because
That was a
the
crazy
CEO
story.
was saying, yeah, that they were coming in with problems and not solutions. And so I think, there's what's HR's role. And I think there's the old HR mentality that I'll say, which is very just status quo. It's okay, I'm just doing my investigations. I'm explaining what the policy is for to employees if they want to know what the benefits is or the vacation policy. I'm doing like hiring and terminations, but that's at the end of the day, that's just keeping things at the same level, right? You're not progressing the business forward. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of CEOs are now expecting from their C-suites, okay, what are you guys doing to further the business? Whether it's finance, whether it's the COO, whether it's the, CHRO, everyone has to bring something to the table that they're moving the company from point A to point B. And for us, where we see a lot of that ROI is on the employee engagement side, because student transportation has a very high attrition rate. So again, if we have employees where they want to work for us and they want to come, because being a school bus driver isn't easy. It's tough.
No.
You got to get up early sometimes. You can have rowdy kids. You got to drive sometimes through inclement weather. And, it's not for everyone. But again, if we can't keep them, then we're not servicing that run. Kids can't go to school. And that's an issue at the end of the day. So we really focus on making sure we're having engaged employees. And, we have our surveys that we do. We're pretty frequent in our candidates. So we do them every two months. We have a program that gives us all of the data on that front. And then something in Canada that we really focus on is what I call active listening. Because I think there are companies out there that they treat employee engagement and their surveys as a check mark, right? It's,
Right.
they go in and the leader says, all right, I want you to get 50, 60% participation. And then all HR does is try to get to that magic number so that they can report it back up and say, oh, we hit that 60%. But then what are you doing with the data that you're getting? Because maybe you get that short-term win, But your next survey, if you're not engaging with your employees, you're actively listening. And for me, actively listening is giving updates on the survey. It's, hey guys, here's what I heard this survey round, and here's what I'm doing. And it's also being transparent, right? If employees are asking for something that, the company can't do for whatever reason, explain that. Employees are human. Like, most individuals are reasonable. And if you're transparent with them and you're giving them a rationale why you can't do A, they appreciate that rather than just feeling ignored because you
Right.
never responded. And so I think this has kept our participation in Canada. We've been the best participating region for a few rounds. Now we've seen like pretty significant NPS improvement since I started. I think we're up over 100%, and like even year to date, 22%. And again, I credit a lot of that to the active listening that my team does, and also just the buy-in from leadership. Because if you've got, the field that doesn't buy into an employee engagement, you've already lost. And that's the one thing I like about First, is that we've got buy-in across the board for this, and we want to make sure our employees.
What's interesting to me is, okay, you all have 55,000-ish employees. There is no way, no way on earth someone from the C-suite or a step down is getting out and meeting all those people every year and addressing their concerns and all this. So you have to push a lot of that closer to where the action is, closer to the people are. And it seems to me that employee engagement surveys are a good tool to kind of help you know where to concentrate your effort or what questions to ask or answer. I'm curious about that. Have you found that, okay, we run this employee engagement survey and say we hit 50 or 60% of what we consider engagement? What do you do from a qualitative approach to improve that? So I'm sure within, say, 60%, there are variations of engagement, but there's a threshold at which you say, okay, we can't consider this person engaged. But within that context, there might be 3 or 4 different levels or categories of engagement. It could be mildly engaged, surprisingly engaged, whatever you want to, you want to put on it. But then you've got that other 40% out there. How do you improve the qualitative aspect of that 60% and at least try to bring along a sizable portion of that 40% that is coming in as disengaged?
Yeah. So one thing we really focus on, and again, I'll say this is like what I view as kind of new HR mentality, is getting the HR professionals out in the field, right? I think the current state is you're sitting at your office, right? You're doing an email, you're doing a Teams. But the way I saw, like, again, where you're getting an ROI from the HR department is your HR department is your coaching and mentoring department, right? We see it a lot in C-suites. They spend a lot of time and sometimes a lot of money on third parties to bring in executive coaches, right? How to be a leader, how to speak, so on and so forth. But a lot of businesses, that doesn't trickle down, right? And how do we make sure our managers, which are at the front line dealing with our employees, are being coached? Because a lot of times, managers haven't gotten any, right? They've moved up the ladder for a variety of reasons, and no one's coached them. And, again, as we see poor managers, just like on a sports team, if you're a bad coach, your team isn't going to perform. If you're a good coach, you're going to be able to elevate the team and the performance that you have. So one thing we do is we're very stringent in making sure that we're going out to the field and we're promoting that active listening. So when my team goes out to visit a site, their expectation is they're talking to all the office staff. They're talking to all the technicians. Now, sometimes we might have 400 drivers, so we can't get to all of them, all of them in a day. But you're going out in the parking yard and you're talking to the drivers as well, right? And while you're doing that, you're asking the same questions maybe on the survey, but more in-depthly, right? And so then what those employees are seeing is, oh, it's not just like a digital thing that I just have to do because it's my job and someone's telling me. They're seeing us come and be in the forefront and being like, hey, how's your day? How are things? Any issues working for first student? What's causing you troubles? So on and so forth. And then obviously, we go and we promote our surveys, making sure have you filled out the survey. We value your opinion. One thing I always tell folks when when they're like, oh, I don't really, see the value in filling out the survey. I say, look, imagine the company's a chef. If we're making all of these meals that don't taste good and none of the customers are sending the food back, the chef is going to think everything's great, right? So if there are issues that we can go and we can work on, you got to let us know, because it has to be a two-way street for communication. So we do that. We have the in-person discussion. Sometimes we'll do like roundtables as well. And then we will end the day with the location manager and give them coaching, being like, hey, here's what we're hearing at a high level. We're not going to go and say, John said that, the washrooms need to be cleaned or whatever. We'll say like, hey, we're hearing a consistent theme that the state of the washrooms, need to be looked at. And obviously I would expect them to go in to double check, but we go and have those conversations and give them coaching on, all right, how do you go and make sure you're going from point A to point B? What is your action plan to make sure you're getting more engaged employees? And then we're looking at their specific data as well. Like, okay, maybe you only had a 30% participation. So here's what we're going to suggest you do next round so that you're bumping that up to 40, 50%. And our data is even really good because it breaks it down into, tenure of employee. You can break it down by sex. You can break it down by job classification. So you can say, all right, maybe with the dispatchers, I've got 80% participation, but with the techs, I've got 10. So I now need to know where I'm going to get my value from. Is not promoting the survey to the dispatchers, but it's going into the shop and talk to them and be like, hey guys, survey's up, really appreciate, you giving your opinion, it's confidential, so on and so forth. And again, what we really focus on is making sure after the survey round, we're sending that summary survey so that employees can see, oh, hey, my manager did read the comments. Oh, this is the action plan that my manager's doing. And then obviously throughout the course of the year, they give updates on their action plan. And that creates that, I think, culture where employees say, all right, this isn't just a check mark. It's an actual system that the company is interested in and is working on. And that's why, again, I think we've seen a pretty significant improvement in that area, because we buy into it and we live it.
So what is two things? I'm going to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about getting out into the field. That is a recurring theme I've heard from more and more guests, more and more people in the human capital space that I interact with. In fact, one of my board members, we were talking early on in our relationship, and she pointed out that she is a business professional who just happens to specialize in human resources. And I really like that perspective, because a lot of people think of HR and they think compliance. They think taking out, and dealing with some of what's called, I guess, the dirty work, or you got a PIP out there, performance improvement plan. And now we're going to have to, get close on this. And, you hear complaints about people in human resources not understanding how the business makes money, not, understanding this or these technical requirements or whatever. I think any effort to push HR out into the field, to engage with the people who are turning the crank, pumping the fuel, fixing the flats, scheduling missed pickups, whatever it might be. I think that's so valuable. And in alignment with that, because I think it's something, an evolution, it's necessary at every company that's not already doing that. But in alignment with that, how does leadership look, or how should leadership look at the value measurable and improving employee engagement could bring to the organization?
Yeah. So for me, what I think is you need to already have good data tracking, right? Because again, we always see the reports, take, like I said earlier, right? Engaged employees stay with the company longer. Okay. Well, to prove that to your leadership, you should have attrition data, right? And then for us, okay, engaged employees are more safe. So we have to make sure we have safety data. And then what we can go and see is you can look at both sets of data and say, okay, over time, the last couple of years, our engagement score has gone up. So are we seeing that then same business objective of lower attrition rates, lower safety infractions over the same period of time? And what I think that does is it helps reinforce the buy-in, right? Because a lot of times I think people just think like employee engagement is like the hip thing you do now. in HR. It's just the word to justify their existence. But if you can back it up with data, and then you can then maybe turn those data into dollar figures, then you're able to justify that the plan is working, right? And it's the same thing. Maybe, you've got a piece where, again, let's say you've got your monitors are a not engaged job classification, and then you've got data that supports you're seeing higher attrition rates amongst them, right? Now you're seeing, again, the opposite as well. So you're seeing when you're getting more engaged, you're getting better metrics. And then when you're seeing less engagement, you're seeing worse performance. And I think when you have that, because nowadays, I think every C-suite is looking at data, right? And, that's what AI is also there to help there, is making sure you're getting data. How do you analyze the data? And once you get that, then it helps you make even better strategic decisions. So you've got to be clean on the data front to support the employee engagement.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely spot on, but we ought to at some point have a conversation. How do you drive that in, say, companies with fewer than 50 headcount versus the ones that have 50,000 plus? Because coming across that data could be really challenging. I would assume that it gets to more of a subjective sort of employee engagement, i.e., individuals talking to individuals versus things being surveyed. But that's a rabbit hole for a different day. But if
Yeah.
someone wants to get deeper with you, get in contact and explore this whole concept of employee engagement with more depth, what's the best way for folks to find you?
Yeah, just go onto my LinkedIn. You just type in my name, Joseph Fiorino. You'll likely see it says first student in there, has my title. So just feel free to shoot me a message.
Sounds awesome. Joseph, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And man, I've got some post-show questions around employee engagement too. So I'd imagine some people probably will reach out to you about this. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Inside Human Capital, presented by Connex Partners and Sabretooth.